Again, good evening. Welcome to the EDS Awareness Educational Series webinar. My name is John Furman. Before we introduce our speaker, we'd like to give just a brief overview of our free programs for those attending for the first time. So we'll go over who we are, what are our programs, introduce our speaker, and then there'll be a Q&A. So again, my name is John Furman. I manage the National EDS Awareness and Chronic Pain Partners nonprofit organization based in Cincinnati. My daughter, Deanna, was diagnosed with hypermobile EDS in 2008, the same year my wife, Carol, passed away with breast cancer. I was a caregiver for my wife who struggled with undiagnosed EDS for over 30 years. We introduced our programs at the 2012 EDNF conference to help EDSers form independent local support groups and spread EDS awareness in their communities. We've been a sponsor for many of these conferences and EDS events. We've started or supported over 120 support groups to date. Each group is given their own free website and a link to the directory map. In 2019, we presented a program to help leaders organize and manage their support groups in Facebook. Mandy Harvey was a guest speaker for that program that was web streamed and recorded and posted at leadeds.com. We received feedback that conferences provide valuable information and social opportunities, but many cannot afford physically or financially to attend in person. So we decided to bring the speakers to you through the free EDS Awareness Educational Series. We have over 120 webinars that you can search by presenter's name, topic, and location. Our healthcare providers educational program was introduced in September 2017. It provides free continuing education credits that healthcare providers need to renew their license. It is receiving an overwhelming response from the medical community worldwide. Many of the speakers in our Since nurses spend more time with patients than doctors, we introduced the first online EDS nursing education program in 2020. We currently have 3 programs set up on our site. We have 3 more in the planning phase. We kind of got interrupted with the pandemic and still working on the last 3 programs for the nursing program. Many of our speakers in our programs have contributed to this newly released book, Disjointed. We have a book review on our site, and it's valuable information for those of us that are supporting or helping those with hypermobile EDS. Please sign up for our EDS Awareness Monthly newsletter. We introduced this in May last year for EDS Awareness Month, and we do monthly webinar or announcements of webinars and information about books and research that's being conducted for EDS. These are some of the resources. I'll be providing the slides for my presentation and Bonnie's, and these are links to the resources we discussed. So just a general disclaimer. This presentation contains general information about EDS. Members of the EDS community voluntarily participate in the program. The information is not advice. If you're having medical problems now, please call 911 or the emergency services in your location. Always consult your doctor before making any changes to your treatment. For those attending live, there'll be an opportunity for Q&A at the end of the presentation. Add your questions at any time by clicking the Q&A button on your panel, typing your question, and then clicking the submit button. So again, we're very pleased to have Bonnie Nasar back again. She gave a presentation previously. Bonnie graduated magna cum laude from New York University with a bachelor's in science of nutrition and food studies. She completed her dietetic internship with CUNY Hunter in New York City. For over 20 years, Bonnie has been a registered dietitian, nutritionist, working with every age group from babies to the elderly. Her areas of specialty include mast cell activation syndrome, EDS, and chronic pain. So again, this is in the slides and a link to her site. So I'm going to turn the microphone and the presentation over to Bonnie. And Bonnie, we're so pleased to have you here. I'll mute myself and you are on. Thank you, Bonnie.
All right, thanks, John. Hi, everyone. Okay, so we're going to talk obviously about nutrition, a couple different aspects of it tonight. But primarily, we really want to talk about how to build an EDS plate. So let me just introduce myself. I know John told you about my education. I have Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. I also have POTS. I have 2 children that have mastocytosis. So those 2 children are currently 17 and 19 years old. So, you know, I've been dealing with this a very long time. And, you know, this has kind of become my life. And now I work it at home and in the office. Hopefully it goes to the right side now. Yes. Okay. So what are we going to learn tonight? We're going to learn about the components of a balanced diet, why these components matter specifically for Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, how to build that plate, real examples of what that food should look like, and we'll also talk a little bit about resources for further learning. So this is for you if you are feeling confused about what to eat. There's a lot of information and misinformation online today, unfortunately. And you know, if you're not sure how food impacts EDS symptoms, and if you're struggling with planning your meals. And you know, the one unfortunate thing about having a condition that isn't well studied is that we don't really have, you know, evidence-based nutrition information specific to Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. Hopefully, there will be some studies that are going to come out eventually on nutrition and EDS, but for right now, because we do like to base our information and our treatment plans on science, you know, we're going to kind of use the, you know, chronic pain and anti-inflammatory community to base things off of, because we do know that we unfortunately do have a lot of inflammation within our bodies. So what are the components of a balanced diet? So first, there's fruits, right? Now you can use fresh fruits or you can use frozen fruits if that's easier for you because they are pre-washed. And that is a really good option when we don't feel well and we want to make something healthy, but we don't want to have to wash and cut and dice and everything. We can use frozen. That's totally okay. The one you would want to look out for would be canned, because oftentimes fruit that is canned is going to be canned in a syrup, and that's going to add a lot of sugar, and we do not want to do that. Vegetables, again, obviously there's fresh vegetables, which are great, and now a lot of grocery stores are starting to sell pre-cut and washed vegetables, which is another option. And again, of course, the frozen option. That is a really good option. Again, preferable to canned with the vegetables, actually because of the high sodium content if someone was looking to watch their sodium. But generally speaking, also the texture of frozen vegetables is maybe a little bit better than canned vegetables. This, of course, does not include beans. Canned beans, you can find a lower sodium one if you do need it. So we don't include that here. Fiber-rich carbohydrates, right? So not the white bread or the, foods that are processed, highly processed. We want to avoid those. But what we do want to include are fiber-rich carbohydrates. So they can be cooked from dry, they can be ready prepared or packaged. Just look at the ingredients on the list and make sure it's really just, the brown rice. You can buy brown rice frozen, you can buy brown rice in a package that's ready to use, that's shelf stable, for instance. So you really can, find a lot of different options now that will save you time and prep. But you do want to make sure that they are whole grain and fiber rich. That fiber is important for us. Proteins. So with protein, again, you can cook it from raw or from frozen for the animal sources. Both of those are great options. If a person has mast cell issues, they want to be a little bit more careful with their animal protein. And make sure it is very fresh and has not been sitting around either in the grocery store or in your refrigerator for a while. And then, dried or fresh or prepared vegetable protein sources as well. We also really want to include healthy fats. And the healthy fats are going to be the plant-based oils, fatty fishes, nuts, and seeds. And again, like the avocados that are there, almonds, the walnuts, these are all really good sources of fat, and fat is essential to us for life. So let's talk a little bit about why each of these components matter specifically for EDS and for the symptomology that we have. Okay. So fruits and vegetables, number one, there's vitamin C in a lot of them, and that's really crucial for our collagen synthesis. Now, we typically do make improper collagen, right? That's part of EDS, but we do want to make sure when we are synthesizing proteins in our body to use that we're doing it with all the ingredients that we need to do it. Even though it's going to be faulty, we still want to make the best of it that we can. There's phytochemicals in fruits and vegetables, and these are little guys that reduce oxidative stress and inflammation, and they are, seem to be important in promoting gut health. And gut health, we're learning, is so important for the health of the rest of the body. Fiber. We talked about fiber-rich foods before. So fiber is so important for the gut microbiome. The fiber is used to make the butyrate, and that compound is actually really important for decreasing intestinal and chronic inflammation. Fiber can also help with constipation, which is really important. So, basically, when we include fruits and vegetables in our daily meals, we're going to decrease those pro-inflammatory cytokines, and those are the things that kind of cause that generalized inflammation in the body, and the reactive oxygen issues that we have, and that also contributes to inflammation. And we can get fiber from our carbohydrates too, right? So these fiber-rich carbohydrates, so meaning these whole grain carbohydrates, these are going to be important for the B vitamins. The B vitamins are so important for energy production and also for our red blood cells. But without them, we can't really go through those cycles to make energy. And we all know we need that energy. Eating fiber-rich carbohydrates will also really help to avoid that glycemic peak for like compared to when you eat a refined carbohydrate, your blood sugar might go up really quickly. That'll cause the insulin to come out, you know, and it kind of can cause this vicious cycle. And so keeping the glycemic index and the blood sugar more constant in your bloodstream actually can help to manage inflammation. And again, that fiber, we can't get enough of it. So important for the GI microbiome and, you know, decreasing inflammation. So similar to the fruits and vegetables, we do see anti-inflammatory compounds and properties in these fiber-rich carbohydrates, which is why it is important to include them. Protein is made up of amino acids, right? So our body will break down those amino acids and then it will use those different amino acids and combine them to make the collagen. So like I said before, you know, our collagen and our protein might really be faulty, but we still want to make what we can and make the best of it that we can. So we do need to eat enough protein in order to make protein because we break it down and use those building blocks. So plant-based proteins, poultry, seafood are definitely, you know, more favorable compared to red meat. So it's good to include those types of proteins primarily. Doesn't mean you can't have the red meat, just means you want to have that as more of an occasional item. And proteins do contain, you know, vitamins and minerals that are necessary for lots of different body processes as well. Healthy fats are really important for the skin, for hormones, and for brain health. You know, the right kind of fat can really help to reduce inflammation. But again, just for the development of the brain and everything, it's really important to keep those healthy fats in the diet. So let's talk a little bit about supplementation. So B vitamins, like we said before, are very important for energy production. A lot of times in Ehlers-Danlos syndrome patients, we do see deficiencies in some of the B vitamins. So it is important to make sure you are getting what you need. You can always ask your doctor for blood work to check on your B vitamins. And that can sometimes be helpful to pinpoint supplementation needs. And again, you know, it can get complex, but because our gut health is also sometimes impaired with EDS, it's possible that we're not absorbing things the way that we need to. And sometimes we do have to find alternate ways. So whether it's a sublingual or an injection, sometimes that is what needs to be done. But very often we can either change the way we eat a little bit or, you know, introduce a traditional supplement to get what we need. Magnesium is very, very important. It helps with muscle soreness, sleep, inflammation, anxiety, brain health, you know, making proteins and collagens, and also can help with constipation. Magnesium, you know, again, depending on, you know, what you're including in your diet, you could be deficient in it, or you could also just likely require more than the typical person. And, you know, we definitely find that EDS patients could use some extra magnesium. L-carnitine is a supplement that is involved in energy production. If a person is found to be deficient in it, you know, we would want to find ways to include that in the diet. And MSM, which is methyl sulfonyl, oh, I always mess this one up. It's methyl, hang on a second. I wrote it down so I wouldn't forget it. Methyl sulfonyl methane. Okay, so this is actually really well studied. And, you know, we're finding it to be kind of important as an antioxidant, and it has anti-inflammatory properties. It can actually reduce cytokine productions in the body and, you know, really help with a lot of symptoms. So, you know, there have been human studies and, you know, it is something to think about or discuss with your doctor. So let's talk about food sources of these, because obviously it's always good to get them from food sources rather than, supplementing if possible. So the B vitamins, again, there's a whole bunch of B vitamins and we're kind of grouping them together. So not all of them can be found in each food item, but, salmon, citrus fruits, green leafy vegetables, animal products and stuff like that. And again, some of the other B vitamins can also be found in those fiber-rich carbohydrates as well. Magnesium can be found in some nuts and seeds, leafy greens and legumes. L-carnitine is really only in animal products. So, if a person is a vegetarian and they did check their level, it might be something that they would need to supplement. MSM can be found in coffee, tea, green leafy vegetables, apples. All right, so let's move on to some more supplements. So vitamin D is very important for healthy bones, inflammation, the immune system. And, we heard a lot about that with COVID, patients who had a low vitamin D level who got COVID were more likely to have severe COVID, unfortunately. And that's directly related to the immune system not working as well as it could with optimizing the vitamin D levels. That's something that's really easy for us to do. B12, I put this one separately because this one is compared to the other B vitamins, it's actually a really important one because it's the only B vitamin that can, if you're deficient for long enough, can cause irreparable damage. So it's really important to make sure that your B12 level is above 400. For some people, they can actually have an issue between 200 and 400. So, again, talk to your doctor about that if you are having symptoms of B12 deficiency. And it's really important for red blood cells, but also important for your nerve health. And that's something that can cause permanent damage if left long enough. Vitamin C for collagen synthesis, wound healing, people who have a lot of bruising. It's also very helpful for iron absorption to take vitamin C at the same time as your iron supplement if you have an iron deficiency. And then the last one I wanted to mention is lion's mane, which is a mushroom. And this is, it's an actual mushroom, you can buy it, but a lot of times people are, it's kind of like a little bit of a buzzword these days, specifically with like Alzheimer's patients, but it can help, or it's been shown to help. We do need more research done, but it's been shown to help with brain fog, depression, and anxiety. It also has been shown to help protect the stomach against ulcers. So this is something that a lot of patients are finding helpful. So vitamin D, obviously you can make it from the sun, but we kind of don't want you to do that because that means you're likely not wearing sunblock and the sun exposure and skin cancer situation is not ideal. So unfortunately for that reason, it is preferable to get it either from food or fortified foods, or again, the fish, beef liver. Believe it or not, shiitake mushrooms actually have a decent amount of vitamin D. Otherwise, it's supplementation or from the fortified foods like the fortified milks or fortified juices. B12, again, you can get if it's fortified. Sometimes like the vegetarian or like plant-based milks will be fortified with B12, assuming that people don't get enough of it. Dairy milk will have, eggs, tuna, the organ meats again, and fortified cereals. So if you find that you don't eat a lot of those and you feel like you have some symptoms of B12, always a good idea to get that checked out. Vitamin C can be found in citrus fruits, bell peppers, strawberries, tomatoes, cruciferous vegetables. So cruciferous meaning, like Brussels sprouts, cauliflower, broccoli, and white potatoes. And the lion's mane can be purchased as a mushroom or as a supplement. So I wanted to just touch on things that are not recommended for EDS. And you know, unfortunately, sometimes a lot of well-meaning doctors will hand out a histamine list and tell you avoid everything on here that's high in histamine, right? That's not really what works. There are, you know, first of all, the jury's still out as to whether, you know, histamine is an issue or not for Ehlers-Danlos syndrome patients. Of course, if there's the complication of mast cell disease, there could be a higher incidence of a person not tolerating foods that are high in histamine. However, you know, in all my years of working with patients, I have yet to have 1 or 2 patients that had exactly the same triggers with food. There's no one size fits all diet, unfortunately. And what happens is when we eliminate everything, we also eliminate really good nutrients that we need. We eliminate those nutrient dense fruits and vegetables sometimes. But maybe we weren't having a problem with them at all, and there was no need to eliminate it, right? So it really is important not to follow any blanket diet ever. Food intolerance tests or hair analysis tests. So these are tests that purport to identify food intolerances. There's a bunch of different names out there for them now. Again, we don't have the evidence, the scientific evidence to back up that these tests reliably and consistently produce the same results. So unfortunately, unless it's an IgE allergy, meaning you're actually allergic to a food, there really is not a test to tell you what your food intolerances are. I wish there was. I hope there will be one day. That would be amazing. But as it stands right now, there really isn't a test that will accurately tell us. And oftentimes what happens is with these tests, the person who sells you the test will then have you do this like very severe elimination diet, right? So they'll take out like, you know, tons of foods and put you on a very limited diet. And oftentimes, maybe you were eating a food that was offensive to you and causing issues, and you now feel better. But that doesn't tell us much, because maybe you stopped having caffeine and they stopped dairy and they stopped gluten and they stopped, you know, all kinds of stuff. And now you feel better. Well, that's too many variables to take out. We don't know which of those variables was the culprit. And again, when we restrict too much, we're at risk for disordered eating, and we're at risk for malnutrition. And we're at risk for malnutrition anyway with EDS and, you know, not having ideal stomachs that absorb everything. So to take out that nutrient dense food is not ideal unless you're sure that it's causing you an issue. Another one is the NAET testing. This is kind of like an alternative medicine, chiropractic sort of testing that, you know, they claim can treat allergies or intolerances. Again, unfortunately, no evidence to back up that it in fact does work. So what does work, right? So, you know, you're not going to really like my answer, but it really is a personalized diet modification. So, you know, it's all about watching what you eat and seeing what affects you, and then, you know, eliminating foods based on those symptoms. Tracking with the food and symptom diary. I can't stress this enough. Tracking all the foods, anything that passes through your mouth, all foods eaten and drinks and everything, supplements included. You track all of that. You track what time you ate it. And you track the symptoms that happen and what time those symptoms happen. And then you can look over that diary for, let's say you do it for a couple of weeks, right? Then you'll be able to look for patterns, see what's going on there. And oftentimes we can find the culprit just by that. And then we can eliminate the foods that we think are causing the problem, see if the symptom resolves. If the symptom resolves, we can then opt to reintroduce the food and see if the symptoms resume. If the symptoms resume, that's a food that's probably off the table for now for you. But again, it's, you know, a detailed process. It's not fancy. It's not, you know, something that we can like package and sell, but that's what we have for now, and that's what works. what else can you do, right? So it's not just about nutrition. I do want to emphasize that every little thing that you do to help you feel better will give you relief. And when you add all those things together, so a little bit of nutrition, a little bit of this, a little bit of that, all these treatment modalities, you add them together, you're going to have significant relief. That's the goal here. But, you know, you got to kind of really do all the little pieces of the puzzle to put it together to see that, you know, big, you know, finished puzzle. So sleep is so important. You know, EDSers tend to, unfortunately, people are more likely to be diagnosed with sleep disorders. So it is important to have good sleep hygiene and get adequate sleep. And, you know, you can always go to a sleep specialist to help to, you know, look at what's going on with you and whether or not there are things that you can do to help with that. Exercise. Again, doesn't have to be, you know, crazy exercise, just, you know, whatever works for you. You got to maintain that muscle and you got to protect those joints, right? So having good muscle strength is going to protect those loose joints. And don't quote me on this, but I believe that there was a study done where they did find that we do kind of use it or lose it more than the average population, meaning that if, you know, we don't use our muscles, we lose that muscle mass a little bit faster than regular non-EDS people. Physical therapy is also really important. So I separated that out from exercise because physical therapy, you know, they have treatment modalities that they can do for us. So whether it's massage or, you know, ultrasound technology, laser technology, there's all these things that they have, you know, bracing and things like that, that they can do to help us manage the joint hypermobility, which will help to manage the pain. And having a good quality care team. You gotta, you know, seek out the specialists as much as possible, you know, to help you really, you know, give you little pieces of the puzzle that add up to, you know, the complete picture. Okay, so now let's get into some real examples of like, what should the plate look like? What do I eat, right? So here's a little pictogram that kind of shows you how to fill your plate up, okay? So protein should be a normal amount, okay? We're not trying to get as much protein in as possible. We just want a regular amount. So like a typical serving might be about the size of like a deck of playing cards, you know, could be a little more than that, but, you know, think of that visual, or you can also think of like, you know, the size of the palm of your hand. And then we want to have our whole grain or starchier vegetables also making up, you know, a quarter of the plate, okay? Fruits and vegetables, we want to have as much of that as possible, the more the merrier. And then we want to have a nice amount of our healthy fats. That could be olive oil on top of your salad. That could be diced avocado, you know, which works as the fruit and vegetable and as the fat. It can be the nuts and the seeds and all that good stuff. And then, of course, we want to drink liquid, typically in the form of water, or again, if there's POTS going on, an electrolyte solution is another good item. Herbal teas are also really good for hydration, but we kind of want to stay away from the sugary drinks. So translate that into real world. This is what it can look like. So there's your protein. You got tons of veggies on that plate. You've got your quinoa as your fiber-rich carbohydrate. And then you've got your avocado and some olive oil and some seeds on there for your healthy fat. So that's a nice, colorful plate. And, you know, typically the more color in a vegetable, the more nutrient density it has in terms of the vitamins and the minerals. So color is always a good thing. Here's another example. So we have whole grain bread. We've got some spinach and avocado and some sprouts. And then we've got an egg for our protein on top and also for our fat. And here's a snack that can work well, would be, a high protein yogurt. So this can be plant-based as well. You just want to check on your plant-based yogurts. Not all of them have the right amount of protein in them, but a quick fix for that is if you find one that works well for you, but it doesn't have a lot of protein, you can always throw some protein powder into that and use it that way. And then we've got some fiber-rich granola in there, and obviously we've got our berries to give us our antioxidants. So this would be a nice little snack. Or again, if you wanted this as a side of your meal and then you had something else with it, that would work as well. So let's look at some more snack ideas. So, a snack, sometimes we just think a snack is like just grabbing something small, right? But we got to put a little more thought into these snacks. So, we want to always have the fiber-rich carbohydrate, the fat, and the protein mixed in to every snack or meal that we're having, okay? And, the reason for this is because this will provide sustained energy for us. It will lower the glycemic load of the meal rather than, let's say, just eating something that's very carby without fiber, without fat, without protein. So it'll increase your satiety, feeling full, and it will help digestion go on for longer because the fat and the protein take longer to digest than just eating a carbohydrate. And why that's good is because then your body can actually take more from the food if the digestion is longer. So, heavy carb snacks are really going to lead to that high glycemic load and then that crash, the blood sugar spikes and then it goes down and then you're left not feeling very well energy-wise. So healthy, simple snacks are going to be things like a sliced apple with peanut butter, granola with some soy milk, and sliced strawberries. Again, pay attention, of course, to the granola if you don't make it yourself, and just make sure it's not filled with tons of sugar. But there are some good ones out there. Sliced peppers with hummus and crackers, whole grain crackers, avocado toast on whole grain toast, topped with some chickpeas or some hummus, yogurt with walnuts and blueberries. Again, with the yogurt, it is important to stress that it's an unsweetened yogurt, not a sweetened yogurt. So now let's talk about how do you eat outside the house? Because it's one thing to be able to prepare all your foods yourself, right? But when you go out of the house, it becomes a little harder because you're not as much in control, right? So if you're going to a dinner party, what you can do is bring a dish, offer to make a dish that you can eat. And then there'll be something there at that dinner party that you can have, right? If you're comfortable with the people who are making the dinner party, you can ask them what their recipes are. Can I see what you're making? Can you show me the recipe? And then you can decide if you can eat it or not. You can, try, if you can't find anything to eat, you can always, bring water, but put it in a wine glass or something so that you feel like you're blending in. If you feel like you want to kind of have something and sip it, you can even bring an herbal tea, like a hibiscus tea. So it's a red color. And then, you don't feel like you're completely, out of touch with everything that's going on. And then of course, as a last resort, if you feel like you can't eat while you're there because you checked out the menu and it's just not going to work for you, you can always eat beforehand and then stick to little snacks or food items, maybe the crudité vegetables or something. And, remember that you're there to have a good time and to be in good company, and it's not really about what you're eating. Restaurants can be very difficult, of course, as well. So it is important to look on the website. Nowadays, almost all restaurants have their menus up on the website, and you can look to see what options are available to you that will work for you. You can call the restaurant and ask them how the food is made. If it's an oil issue, what oils do they use? If they could maybe make something baked and not fried instead, if there's substitutions that they're willing to make. And it is always a good idea to call a restaurant in between meal times. So don't call it the lunch rush or the dinner rush. Call in the middle, and then you're more likely to be able to get the chef on the phone, and they will be able to tell you what they're capable of doing. Not all restaurants are able to make substitutions, and unfortunately it's a logistic issue, and we know that restaurants are having a particularly difficult time right now with workers and having enough workers. So we have to be patient with them. And do the right thing and ask them when they're not at their busiest. And then, of course, as a last resort, you can always eat beforehand and stick to ordering like a side of steamed vegetables or just some water or an herbal tea. If you have to do that, that's okay. And remind yourself you're there for the company, you're there to be with people and to laugh and to enjoy. So it's not always, about the food. Sometimes it's hard when you're, either under the care of a dietitian and you're eating in a specific way, or, you're doing it on your own. It's really hard to get questions from family and friends. Sometimes they mean well, sometimes, they don't. But, just know that you do not have to answer questions if you do not want to. The easiest thing to do is just pretend you didn't hear it. So if someone's like, oh, well, why are you eating like that? What's your diet? I want to hear all about it. Are you doing it to lose weight? And you're just like, oh my gosh, I love your shirt. That's so beautiful. Where'd you get that? And you just gloss it over. People won't usually continue to ask questions when you do that. If you want to be a little snarky, you can just say, I eat for my health. How about you? And turn it back onto them and let them be the focus of the discussion. But, it's up to you. You do not have to answer questions if you do not want to. I wanted to give you a little bit of like a case study of a patient of mine, just to show you like how you can improve things and how it works. So this patient was 18 years old. She was a college student. She had a diagnosis of hypermobile EDS. She also had a diagnosis of mast cell activation disease. She suffered from migraines and POTS as well. So, she really had kind of all the conditions, and she was feeling so tired. She was really struggling to get through her day, to complete her classes, and to do her homework. She had a lot of pain. She had brain fog. She had fatigue, headaches. She also had a lot of gastrointestinal pain that included bloating and constipation as well. And she really just wanted to feel better so that she could, focus on her studies and, find a profession for herself. So this patient was very young, obviously at 18, but she had an incredible mom. So, she really did have a good support system. She had a really good outlook. She really wanted to just make the best of her situation. She was trying to advocate for herself. But she found everything just so overwhelming to her. She had a full workload, and just thinking about what to do with the food was really hard for her. She knew that she needs to eat to feel good, but also she was having pain from the food. So, that's something that we really have to pay attention to, because, it's a problem when the food that we eat, which is supposed to sustain us, is also causing us pain. We kind of develop this love-hate relationship with food, and that can be really problematic for a lot of people. This patient had a normal weight for her height, so she was not losing weight, thankfully. So that was a good thing. So how did we manage her? So we had her do a food and symptom diary. We had her, one thing she had been eating a lot of was tomato products, and tomatoes are typically an issue for mast cell patients. Not always, but can be. So I did see from her food and symptom diary that it seemed to indicate tomatoes. So we got rid of the tomato products, and that helped significantly with her GI symptoms, which was great. She had good days where she ate a lot of vegetables and fruit. She had less sugary foods and less processed foods. She was eating enough of the macronutrients, meaning the proteins, the carbs, and the fats, to meet her caloric needs. But then sometimes she'd have bad days. And on her bad days, what we did for her was we used an oral supplement called Kate Farms. And that's a brand that makes whole foods based, like, kind of like an Ensure or a Boost, but it's made out of whole foods. So we used that on her bad days as a replacement for her meals when we knew she wasn't going to eat anything. So better to eat this sort of artificial whole foods nutrition than eat nothing at all, because not eating is just going to bring the cycle even more, and cause issues for her. So with this particular patient, her symptoms survey had started out at 128 points, and she got down to 86 points. This was a really good start. There were some other issues with her. Her symptoms scale, didn't really reduce as much as I would have liked it to, because she did really struggle. Again, as a typical 18-year-old, she wanted to go out with her friends and eat French fries with ranch dressing. And, she really didn't want to give those foods up. And you know what? That's her choice. She can make that educated choice. She did reduce symptoms by a significant amount. She did feel that her pain level and her fatigue level, were mostly improved. She understood that when she ate processed foods, those situations, those symptoms got worse. So it was a struggle for her, but she did overall feel better. So she felt that having these French fries and ranch dressing type of stuff, it was okay once in a while. And she was willing to deal with the repercussions of it for her. And again, as a full grown adult, 18 years old, she's allowed to do that. The other thing that was difficult with this patient, though, was that I really suspected that she had gastroparesis based on some of her other symptoms. And so gastroparesis is something that unfortunately is very common in our patient population. The stomach kind of slows or stops completely sometimes, the food traveling through your small intestine. So the muscles, for whatever reason, and we think there's a couple different reasons why this can happen, but the stomach muscles stop working and they're not contracting to move things along as well. So the food sits in the stomach. Sometimes people will vomit. Sometimes they will be very, very constipated, feel full, and they can't eat anything, and they'll have weight loss. In the regular population, non-EDS population, diabetes is the most common underlying cause due to nerve damage. But we do see it in a high rate in Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, and I think more study is needed. So this patient was encouraged to do a GI motility study to see if she had gastroparesis, because there are things, treatment modalities in place that you can do to make those, improve symptoms with gastroparesis. And, again, the considerations with someone like this is, young people, again, it's really hard for them. So, for this patient to make the changes she made, I think she was awesome. It's hard not to eat junk when you're 18 years old and all your friends are eating stuff and don't even think twice about it. Encouraging meal preparation and easier ways to get things done is important, and encouraging food intake on high pain days. Starving ourselves on the high pain days does not help us. We need to find an easy source of calories on those days that still fits within the nutrition parameters. So resources for further learning. What we spoke about today was a lot, but there are some things that we didn't really talk about. So some other nutrition topics, how anti-inflammatory foods actually decrease chronic pain. So it is really interesting, all those pathways that go on in the body. It's fascinating. It might be boring for some people, but I love it. And which tools and strategies can help us to prepare healthy meals with less effort and time required. I think that that's a really important thing to figure out for each patient. Which foods help us to feel best, which foods make our symptoms worse. Again, utilizing that food and symptom diary. How the trifecta, meaning EDS, POTS, mast cell, can affect our nutrition needs. That's important when a person has all three. We got to really look at it, and sometimes four, the fourth item, which is gastroparesis, and also any other conditions that are more likely to pop up with EDS. We have to really look at all of them together. How to create new habits when changing our food choices for the better. That is easier said than done, but with proper guidance, it can be done. And how to overcome those flares, those bad pain days, without derailing all of the progress. That is very important. We don't want to derail the progress when we don't feel well. We have to still maintain it, but make it doable. So I actually have developed a course for EDS nutrition, and that's up on my website. So if you are interested in learning more, you can certainly take a look at that and see if that is for you. So here's my website, and my email is below. So if you do have any questions that you don't want to put on here, you can certainly email me, and I'll try to respond as best as I can. So I want to thank you for having me, and now we will go to the Q&A. So let's see.
Yeah, thank you, Bonnie. That was very helpful information. I'm going to share that with my daughter who has major EDS issues. And we have a few questions, so please answer those, and we'll go forward. Thank you.
This question is so important. It's so upsetting to me, actually. But she's saying, or he or she is saying that that they, suspect EDS, but they don't meet the criteria for EDS, but yet they go into anaphylaxis, been to a bunch of doctors, and they're scared to eat, and they have food PTSD and swallowing and choking issues. So yes, swallowing and choking issues can definitely be a problem with EDS. There's another condition called EOE, eosinophilic esophagitis. That is something that can actually cause spasming of the esophagus, and you feel like you're choking. Another problem that could also potentially be going on there is the hyoid bone can be hypermobile, and that's in the neck. Again, I'm not a doctor, but something to look out for is is the bone somehow displaced or putting pressure on the throat, and that can cause swallowing, choking issues as well. So these are all things that should be looked at. But regardless, if a person is going into anaphylaxis, an allergist should be treating that regardless of a mast cell, diagnosis or not. Anaphylaxis is anaphylaxis. And again, keeping a food and symptom diary to note what could potentially be the trigger if there are no IgE allergies, that would be a really important part. Okay, so a B12 level above 1200, is that malabsorption or is that considered good? So it's an okay level. It could be that you're unknowingly having a lot of B12. So whether you're taking like several different supplements that contain B12, but typically people would not have an elevated B12 level unless they're over consuming, or again, so it's not really malabsorption, but malusage, as in you have an intake of B12, but your body's not able to use it. And that would be something to look into. So there are different forms of B12 that can be taken. And, sometimes people need the methylated version of B12. in order to be able to use it, because they don't methylate well. And that's a whole other topic for a whole other conversation with the methylation issue. But, in order to use B12, B12 is cobalamin. So typical supplements that you would buy in like GNC, it's going to just be a cobalamin supplement. But there's methylcobalamin. So it's a methyl group. The CH3 is attached to the B12, and then that's the usable form. So a person who has an elevated level of B12, they might need to not have the regular cobalamin, and they might need to get rid of any source of cobalamin in the diet or supplement, and take the methylated cobalamin and see what happens to the level. But of course, refer to your doctor before making any changes. Okay, we've been trying out some mushroom teas recently. I noticed that they include a blend of a few types. So lion's mane seems to be the one that, they've studied a lot in terms of like the brain health and the gut health, and that's why we're looking at that with EDS. But nothing wrong with trying other mushrooms. Absolutely, fine. Mushrooms are all very good for you, except for the poisonous ones, obviously. So don't go into the forest and forage them unless you're really well versed on what they look like. The best diet strategy to follow after bowel perforations in order to heal, and going forward long-term in order to decrease risk of another perforation. So that is something that I would really defer to your doctor on. I don't think I can answer that specifically, but generally speaking, bowel perforations are incredibly serious and must be taken very, very seriously. And again, it would really depend on the reason for the perforation, because there can be several disease processes going on there. So I really don't feel comfortable answering that one specifically. What's my viewpoint on lectins, oxalates, gluten, and phytates? Okay, that's a lot. Again, so it really does depend on the pattern that we see in the food and symptom diary for a person. We don't even really know, we always say gluten-free, whatever, but we don't actually even know if in the people who are what we call gluten intolerant or wheat intolerant, we're not entirely sure if it's the gluten specifically. It could be something else. So until more research is done, it's going to be really hard to give like a blanket statement on them. If it turns out that a person, is tracking their diet and tracking their symptoms, and it seems that symptoms pop up every time they're eating lectin-rich foods or oxalate-rich food or gluten-rich foods, then we have to deal with it like that on a case-by-case basis. I really am not a fan of like a one diet fits all here, because I just, I don't see it that way. I have two kids who have mastocytosis, and those two kids who share DNA, right? Because, they have the same parents, right? And they have the same disease. They don't have the same triggers. So even those two kids who are actually related both have the same type of mast cell disease, and they have different triggers. They maybe overlap on like one or two things, but it really truly is, in this trifecta, it really is about individualized diet. And I know that that's unfortunate. It would be so much easier to just like diabetics, like, here you go, here's your handout, go follow this diet, you're going to be fine. I wish we had it easy like that. Unfortunately, it makes my job a lot harder as well. So I definitely sympathize with the fact that I cannot give you a one size fits all diet plan, but it is what it is. Favorite diet tracking apps. So I really like Chronometer is a good one, but any of them are fine. Really, whatever is the most intuitive to you and easy for you to use. Again, it could also be a notebook and a piece of paper too. So feel free to try them all out and see which one you like. I know sugar is horrible, but is the only thing that helps me with brain fog and dizziness. So it's interesting. Yeah, it's going to help you initially, but in the long term, it's not helping you typically. We eat the sugar because it gives us the energy, right? It gives us that energy spike, but then that energy spike is going to go away once the insulin levels rise. So it is really tricky to get you off of it. But, my advice is to start really slowly. So for instance, if you're drinking like 6 cups of, sugary soda a day, right? Maybe go to 5 cups, and then give that a week or 2, and then go to 4 cups, so little tiny baby steps are the way that we can do that. And, making a point of trying to, even when you're going to eat those sugary items, because, we don't want you to cold turkey it, but if you're going to, have the sugar, because that helps you, try to have the protein and the fat along with it. It might blunt it ever so slightly, so that you get a little bit more of a sustained energy. But gradually reducing that sugar intake is really where we want you to start. We don't want any, like cold turkey type of situations. So I was just diagnosed with EDS, hypermobility. Some doctors tell me not to continue with sports, and others say if I prepare and go slow, it's okay. Is softball, basketball type of sports dangerous? So it's a really loaded question. Obviously, I'm a dietitian, not a doctor, but the consensus of doctors obviously is like maybe not to go into like these contact type of sports. And the reason is because you might be more prone to a dislocation, injury, or, other injuries that are going to be significant. So you kind of have to look at like the risk benefit analysis with things like this, with lifestyle choices. I've heard of patients who, still do ballet or still do gymnastics, and they do fine. I know people who do yoga and they're okay, even though technically yoga is not ideal for EDSers. So, if you make the right modifications, can you do it? Maybe, but you'd want to talk to an expert who can help you to choose, look at the risk benefit ratio and look at the options to make things a little safer for you. And you can certainly do that. I don't really believe in telling, people they can't do things, especially, again, I have my own kids, and, I try to always find a way to make things work for them. Have they been injured? Yeah. And it wasn't fun, but I don't think they regret it. But again, you have to really speak to a knowledgeable doctor about that. This person is saying, I realize I can't tolerate half of the ingredients shown. What do you do when you react to everything? I'm already on chromal and sodium. I can't take any histamines due to multiple side effects. It's getting increasingly difficult. Okay, so there are other options right now besides antihistamines. So, one thing that's being used a lot more is a drug called Xolair, and you can speak to your allergist or immunologist about that. But that drug it seems to be really, really helpful for people who react to many, many foods, helps just to calm the inflammation and calm the mast cells down. So I would look into that. The other thing too is there's other drugs out there. Ketotifen is an excellent drug. It is an antihistamine, it's an H1, but it's also considered a mast cell stabilizer. It's not FDA approved in America orally. However, it is approved for, I believe, like eye drops. So you can get it from a compound pharmacy in America. It is, you're able to do that. You just need a doctor to write the prescription. But that is a true mast cell stabilizer drug as well, and not just an antihistamine. Often fortified grains are for cheap version of the vitamins. Absolutely, that is true with like the folic acid. And some people can't methylate the folic acid. And again, the same problem ensues. They end up with a high level of folic acid in the blood. So if you do have that MTHFR mutation, so that's the mutation that makes it difficult for you to methylate your vitamins, along with hypermobile EDS, are there types of B12 they should avoid? So ideally, you would get the methylated version of B12, so the methylcobalamin, okay? And the methyl tetrahydrofolic acid would be the methylated version of the folic acid. And you would actually really want to, if you did have high levels of, and again, but Also, remember, whole grains, meaning brown rice, meaning whole wheat bread, real whole wheat bread or whole grain bread, they don't have, fortification in them because they didn't remove the wheat germ. They kept it in. So the vitamins are there, and that's the natural state of the vitamin. So it's not fortified. So that's why, having the real version and not the, white version of grains is better and preferable. But yes, you would want to take a methylated version if you did have the MTHFR mutation. What types of nutrient testing do you advocate for by allopathic practitioners? My MD will only check for B12 and vitamin D. I pushed for another test based on my symptoms and was confirmed deficient. But I have concerns that we're still missing things. So, it would really be good to find, like, I guess, a knowledgeable MD who would be willing to run the whole gamut. But, if a person isn't feeling well, you obviously, if it's fatigue and stuff like that, you could attribute it to EDS, but maybe also your, thyroid hormones are low and you need to check that. So a good doctor will cover all the bases. But, if you wanted to ask, you could say you want, all the B vitamins done, you want the folic acid, you want the iron. And when they test for iron, you also want the ferritin, which is the iron stores. Like the iron, you can think of iron as like what's in your wallet to like spend this week, but your ferritin is like what's in your bank account. And you do always want to check that. That is important. You can check your vitamin C level. Again, if you have a lot of bruising, stuff like that, that would be something to check. And obviously checking for different anemias. So B12 would be one type of anemia, but folic acid can be another, and that would typically show up in the regular blood work. What is my viewpoint on ketogenic diet for EDS? Is this something one can do long-term? So a ketogenic diet can be done, and I do use it occasionally still. But what I've found is, again, because we never want to overly restrict, right? So we need to have that more like a lower glycemic load of a diet, meaning we're not raising that blood sugar up high and then crashing it down, right? So I prefer to start my patients off on, reducing the carbohydrates that are refined, meaning the carbohydrates that are going to cause a blood sugar spike. We want to reduce that, and we want to increase the fiber-rich stuff. And we sort of start out more like a lower glycemic index diet. So I guess a little bit low carb, but like not really. And we start off, based on where the person came to me at, so if they're eating, tons and tons of carbohydrates, I'm not going to go and put them on a ketogenic diet. They're going to feel awful. So we're going to gradually lower the carbohydrate intake to where we can make the diet look more like what I showed you on the plate earlier. And if the relief is not yet there, we can continue to reduce until we get to your specific sweet spot of feeling better, not feeling deprived, because it's really important. If you feel deprived, nothing is going to work for you. You're not going to stick to that diet. So we need to make sure that every patient feels that they have a nice variety of food. They don't feel like they're starving. They don't feel like they can't have a ton of stuff. And again, even with a ketogenic diet, it can be cyclical, but it does have to be vegetable rich, a ketogenic diet. It cannot be bacon and butter and eggs all day, especially not long term. Any tips for food prep and storage with consideration for MCAS? So, like I said, using frozen foods, using, and again, you can find, versions of frozen foods that would be acceptable typically for mast cell issues. As far as storage goes, any kind of meat you cook, any animal protein goes right into the freezer. If you're not going to eat it that day, it has to be frozen and then reheated. You cannot leave it in the refrigerator. The best advice I would give is do food prep. So you can have one day of food prep, but a week, but do it on a day where you have the time, you have the energy. So if your energy is better in the morning or better in the evening, pick it, you know, accordingly, you know, or a day that works the best for you. And you can prep a lot of food and put it in individual portions and shove it in the freezer. And this way, on those days where you just don't feel good, you can just pull that out and reheat it. You know, and it's better than just grabbing something out of the pantry that is not going to meet the standards of nutrients that we'd like you to have. With EDS, seems to be extra sensitive to medicines and supplements, or the vitamins and supplements with established dosage recommendations that differ for EDS versus non. So I think like every practitioner is going to have like a little bit of a different idea on that. You know, as far as being sensitive to medications and supplements, I really do try to use brands that don't put a lot of fillers in or colorings or anything like that. You know, my typical go-to brand is Pure encapsulations. I do think that the mast cell patients typically do well with them. And then, you know, as far as dosage, again, it's kind of hard to say that. You know, it really depends on like the deficiency that's going on, how severe it is. You know, and all of that. So that's really kind of hard to answer specifically. Do the decaf coffees and teas have the same antioxidant properties as the caffeinated products? Caffeine is a problematic thing. So yeah, if you can't have caffeine, the herbal teas are great. You know, again, it really does depend on what kind of herbal tea you're having as to what properties it has. But yeah, you can totally experiment with herbal teas. And, you know, hibiscus tea is one that comes to mind. Tea that includes rose hips, that's going to be good for you as well and give you some vitamin C. So yeah, you can definitely get your antioxidants that way without caffeine. Can I comment on MTHFR and homocystinuria? So I think we kind of discussed that, but basically we discussed MTHFR. So that's the mutation, the genetic mutation that potentially causes you. Again, let's not forget that having a gene doesn't mean that gene is turned on. So, you know, how you can find out is if you get your blood level of homocysteine checked and your homocysteine level is elevated, that means that likely that MTHFR is causing you some issues, and you're going to want to make sure you're getting methylated version of vitamins, of the B vitamins. And, you know, you're going to want to be careful with your ingestion of non-methylated versions of that vitamin. What is my opinion on supplementing collagen and turmeric? Okay, so I wish we could ingest collagen and then we could just make good collagen, right? That wasn't effective. Unfortunately, that's not how the body works. We eat it, we digest the collagen, you know, into amino acids, and then we rebuild our collagen, right? So unfortunately, you know, as a protein supplement, sure, it's fine. It can be possibly problematic only because, like, you know, it's a bone broth, and sometimes what's coming out of the bone marrow, you know, there can, you know, be issues sometimes with quality control. So you do want to buy from a reputable brand. But again, a regular old protein supplement is, you know, good also. And actually now there's also been some studies with egg white supplements, and they find that, you know, again, it's that forgetting the name of it. It's when you peel an egg, a hard-boiled egg, and you see that like sort of like thin papery like piece, you know, covering the egg underneath the shell. They take that and they made that, it's like an eggshell supplement. They take that, and that's kind of sort of like a collagen. And, you know, there is some success with that in chronic pain patients and arthritic patients, and reducing inflammation actually. So that is something that's on the radar. So again, supplement with collagen, sure, no problem. But it's not going to make unfaulty collagen. You're still going to make faulty collagen. Turmeric is a spice that also, you know, has some anti-inflammatory properties. So, you know, there's some mixed studies on it, but, you know, the consensus is that it does help to reduce inflammation. So that certainly can be used, you know, of course, at the direction of your physician. What about reflux? So yeah, so the medications for reflux unfortunately can be problematic long-term. because, you know, you're reducing your acid, right? And we need that acid, especially for protein to be digested properly. But also the body retaliates oftentimes and will hypersecrete acid. Like, oh, do you think you're going to lower the acid with that medicine? I'm going to show you how much more I can actually produce. And that's kind of what happens when people are on it long term. So it can be problematic. There is a supplement that I do like to use for reflux. Again, case by case, you know, of course, speak with your physician, but sodium alginate is in capsule form. It's an ingredient that they use in preterm infants in Europe to treat reflux. And it's an extract of seaweed. That's all it is. And what it does is it's like kind of gooey and gelatinous when it mixes with a liquid. So you take that with a glass of water and it mixes with the water in your stomach. And then it forms this gelatinous like layer and it floats to the top of the stomach and it sits there so that the food can't reflux up, right? But not only the you know, the liquid or the food can't reflux up, what they believe in like hard to treat reflux cases is that actually gas refluxes as well. And this is a barrier, a physical barrier, you know, between the stomach and the esophagus. So it prevents the gas also from refluxing and can be very helpful. It doesn't last that long, you know, again, maybe 4 hours or so because of digestion, but you can take it a few times during the day. So that would be something to look into with your physician to see if they think that that would be a way, you know, if that worked for you, then perhaps you could try to lower medications, again, only with the physician's permission. Do EDSers have more food sensitivities than normal people and why? So yeah, I mean, I think that at some point we're gonna find out, you know, someone's gonna do the research and figure out how EDS and mast cell and POTS are all related. You know, again, our autonomic system is dysfunctioning typically, and we know that a lot of people have the GI issues with EDS, definitely increase more than the general population. So there can be more incidences of food sensitivities, absolutely. I don't think we have the answer as to why yet, but I think, you know, as they continue to study and figure out, you know, the like real problems that are occurring within this patient population, they might come up with that. But it could also be, I mean, if you think about it, like we're not making things properly, so then the intestinal wall, you know, maybe the, you know, the barrier isn't as good, and that could be part of the problem. Most coffee contains mold. Is this an issue for EDSers? So, you know, again, case by case, if a person's sensitive to mold, that's going to be a problem. If they're not, you know, it won't. But you can, there's a couple brands out there that check for mold in the coffee. So if a person is sensitive, they certainly could avoid it. You mentioned low sodium canned beans, but for yes. So for dysautonomia, yes, you know, high sodium. So you can, of course, you know, have those high sodium beans. You don't need to buy the low sodium beans. But, you know, there are people out there that do unfortunately have high blood pressure, you know, and it can actually flip-flop too, by the way, in people, especially with mast cell people. So sometimes people do have to be a little bit careful. Sometimes they have water retention issues, and we don't want people to retain water. But if you have dysautonomia and POTS, you are, you know, the doctor allows you to have more salt intake. You don't have to be as careful. That is true. I react to all foods that are high in histamine besides matcha, sometimes chocolate, and sometimes banana. In that case, doesn't it make sense to follow a low histamine diet? So again, if you've done the food and symptom diary and you found that all these foods are causing you an issue, you know, then yeah, you know, you have more triggers than most people, you know, you should avoid your triggers, absolutely. You know, but in general, we don't like to start out excluding everything. We would rather take out the things that seem to be the culprit. This way we don't leave you with nothing to eat. Incidentally, if you react to so much, you know, you really would want to seek out a knowledgeable professional to see what you can do to lessen that. You know, again, so whether it's medication or therapy or, you know, whatever, but, you know, it's important not to have too restricted of a diet. If you do have a restricted diet, there are things that the doctors can do to help you, you know, so that your body calms down and stops reacting to so many foods. That's really an important piece of the puzzle. My cardiologist instructed me to have 10 grams of salt every day. That's almost triple the amount of normal. What foods can I have in order to achieve this without counting on unhealthy snacks and foods? So the salt shaker, just shake, 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 you know, again, olives, pickles, things that are really salty. You know, you can, you know, again, really using that salt shaker a lot is helpful. And using those salty, like I said, olives that are salted and pickles that are salted, those are going to be your best options, but just throw salt on everything. Plain 2% milk has always been a soothing agent for me lifelong. I've done an elimination diet with great results, less bloating, constipation, pain, but 1 cup of milk at night is as soothing to me as my husband's antacid. You don't mention milk products at all. What is your take? So, you know, you're right. I didn't really include that in the protein, but, you know, absolutely it's part of the protein and part of the fat. And if you do fine with dairy, you can absolutely have that dairy, no issues there. So thank you for bringing that up. Some people find dairy products to be inflammatory for them, you know, and some people don't, and that's okay. And that's why I said it's very much an individualized approach. What are some other foods to help digest dark green leafy? Salads seem to be a challenge for me. Is there anything I can mix in? So the reason dark green leafies are hard to digest for the most part is going to be because we're not chewing them well. So, you know, a couple ways we can get around this. Number one is, you know, you can do a little chew challenge for yourself. So, you know, take a green leafy or take a saltine, you know, it could be anything, take a pretzel, chew it and swallow it the way you normally would. Then put another thing in your mouth, the same thing, and chew it until it's absolute mush. And then swallow it and count those chews. And chances are you're going to see that you are not chewing enough. Again, this is a very American problem, typically because we are kind of taught to eat on the go, and, you know, it's, you know, it's just a cultural issue, I believe. But first and foremost, if you're having difficulty with fibrous items, you know, digestion wise, a lot of times it's the chewing, and that will clear it up. Another thing you can do is cook the green leafies. That will make it a little easier to digest as well, easier to chew in addition. So that is something that you can do. You know, alternatively, you could mix the dark green leafy with, let's say, like an iceberg lettuce, which is not very fibrous, you know, and that might help a little bit. You know, so to mix, you know, half and half and then gradually build up. You know, if you're not used to eating dark green leafy vegetables and then you go and have like 2 cups of them, you're going to feel it. You know, it's best to always increase gradually and decrease gradually. So increase the green leafies a little by little each week, as opposed to like, you know, all right, I'm going to have, you know, so much, you know, and then you're feeling sick. Is stevia a good substitute for sugar? Sure. Stevia is a good substitute if you like it and you tolerate it. Another good one is monk fruit sweetener. That's something that I like. Is your accent East Coast? They sound like where my mom is from, New York. So I am in New Jersey, but I suppose, you know, New York and New Jersey are very related, and both of my parents were from New York and had New York accents. So okay, another question, if there's time, how do you limit your sodium if you have POTS? Sodium is a migraine and vertigo trigger, but if I don't do 5 grams of salt a day plus adding salt to my food, I become syncope. It's hard to balance. So if sodium is a migraine trigger, but you also have POTS, you know, that certainly makes things tricky. I would talk to your doctor about what you can do, maybe, you know, as far as migraine prevention goes and vertigo prevention, because there are things that you can do, you know, but, you know, it's also, you'd want to differentiate between the vertigo dizziness and the POTS dizziness, you know, that's kind of hard. You know, but you do want to look into that. You also want to look into the amount of fluids that you're drinking and retaining as well. So sometimes we think that we need like the more the merrier with the water, but it's actually not true, because we can drink too much, and then we have so much water in our system that we actually are, we're diluting the electrolytes, right? And that doesn't help us, and that could probably bring on a migraine. So, you do want to be really careful with that. Generally speaking, the recommendation for, fluid intake is, first, you could just also, you could, as long as you're urinating frequently and your urine is a very light color, you're typically drinking enough. But, really what we say is like, take your weight, divide it in half, and that's the amount of ounces you should be drinking per day. So no one needs to be drinking a gallon of water a day. That's just not good. Explain about not keeping cooked meat in the fridge. Okay, so for people who are diagnosed with a mast cell disease, what happens to the meat, because it's a protein, it degrades, right? It's, for lack of a better word, decaying flesh, right? So it degrades and it breaks down into the building blocks of protein, which is amino acids. One of those amino acids is histamine. So the longer it sits, the more likely it is to have more histamine content in it. And that's why we want to avoid that for mast cell people. And actually, I'll tell you an interesting story. It just happened to me yesterday. A friend calls me up and she says, my daughter and her friends just ate a tuna steak. And all three of them have red cheeks, they're flushed, they have headaches, and their stomach doesn't feel good. What do I do? What is this? Is it food poisoning? And I was like, that's not food poisoning, that's histaminosis. And that is something that can happen. It happens more frequently with fish, actually. And the buildup of histamine, because the fish unfortunately was not fresh. So I told her to go back to wherever the person who bought it from, and have a word with the purveyor there, because that fish was not fresh and it had a big buildup of histamine. And these kids essentially were given like a histamine poisoning, basically. They took Benadryl and they were fine, but it was, and then she ended up taking her child to the emergency room, actually, and the doctor told her the same thing. And she was like, oh my God, you're a genius. I'm like, I'm not a genius. I just deal with this all the time. I know exactly what histamine is all about. Okay. And so the context of MTHFR is adenosylcobalamin or hydroxycobalamin any better than methylcobalamin. So that kind of goes into more detail than I'm ready to discuss, but there are different versions. Again, so MTHFR, there would be other mutations that a person could have, and that could affect, and sometimes you would want to use like a hydroxycobalamin in that case. But again, it's like very specific to genetics, a specific person's genetics. I can't really say, but generally speaking, if it's just MTHFR, the methylcobalamin should typically be okay. And then let's see what's going on here in the chat. Can speech therapy help with swallowing and gagging? So it can help with swallowing and gagging. Again, it really depends what the reason behind it is. So you can get a swallow evaluation from a speech therapist. That's typically who does that. And when they do that, they kind of rule out reasons why you might have a swallowing issue or a gagging issue. If they rule out those things, you'd want to then, go further, and then sometimes, an endoscopy, or, being evaluated for the eosinophilic esophagitis, and stuff like that. So a speech therapist can play a part, but again, it would depend on the diagnosis of why it's happening. Okay. These questions all got answered. Nutrilio and Dalio have been great for rapid logging. Oh, okay. I have not heard of those, so I will definitely look into that. Is drinking Carnation instant breakfast with half lactate and half oat milk all right nutrition-wise? I'm allergic to chocolate, sugar, alcohols, have HEDS, POTS, gastroparesis, 30+ allergies, chronic constipation, etc. I find it to be what I can tolerate most often. If you can tolerate that, that is totally fine. The oat milk, unless you're using the oat milk with added protein, it's not going to have as much protein, but the Carnation Instant Breakfast does have protein in it. And the lactate milk will have protein, so that is okay. Again, this is a situation where, I really encourage you to, get more help from the doctors and see what they can do for you with all of these, food allergies. Again, I mentioned Xolair before. Xolair is something to look into if you can't tolerate many foods. Okay. All right, so I think those were all the questions. Was there anything else? Let's see. Oh, benefit, danger of probiotics. So probiotics can, generally speaking, be very good for you, but there are many different types of probiotics, and some are better for certain situations than others. I can tell you, I had this elderly woman, this elderly EDS woman came to me, and she was having intractable diarrhea, and assuming she had all these issues, and wanted to look for all these issues. And, I come to speak with her, and she's taking a probiotic that is, not the probiotic I would have given her, for someone who was having diarrhea. We changed her probiotic and all her problems went away. So, it is important to be knowledgeable about the differences in the probiotics and which ones are to be given. There's certain ones that are not indicated for mast cell disease. So it is a complex thing to look at. We should not just, in our patient population, you should not just be going and buying a bottle, off the shelf without asking a medical practitioner or dietitian first. Can a severe vitamin D deficiency cause higher cholesterol in your blood? What foods would be ideal for both EDS and lowering cholesterol? So as far as lowering cholesterol goes, the fibery food items are going to really help to bind that cholesterol in, and the fat in the food that you eat. As far as lowering your cholesterol, it's really interesting, but there is more research coming out to show that, the high sugar content of a diet can also impact cholesterol numbers, and not just, the fat that we thought, originally with cholesterol. It's also important to look at family history. Is there, hypercholesterolemia in the family? Is there history of heart disease or not in the family? Those are important things. Vitamin D deficiency can affect a lot in the body, so I wouldn't be surprised, but if it could have somewhat of an impact, I can't say for sure. But, vitamin D does affect a lot of different pathways. And so, one food off the top of my head would be artichokes. Artichokes are really good for cholesterol. There's actually an artichoke supplement that has been shown to have good effect on lowering cholesterol. The food sensitivity app. So Chronometer was the one that I had said. That was the app that I've used in the past and with patients. And I find it to be really easy to use and very intuitive. Okay, any more questions? All right, so John, I think I'm going to stop the share and send back to you, correct?
Well, I think we can leave it right here. You do have
okay.
your website up there that people can contact you, find out more information about the different programs that you're involved with. And we really appreciate you communicating this information about food and nutrition. It's one area that I think more and more EDSers should be looking at, because it makes a big difference in how you're feeling and how you're managing your symptoms. So really appreciate your communicating this, and I'll get it posted in the next couple of days. And thank you again for all your help.
All right, it's my pleasure, John. Thanks for having me, and thanks for all the work that you do.
Thank you very much. You have a good evening, everyone. that attended, thank you for attending. We will post it so you can hear it again, and also share it with some of your friends or on Facebook. That would be incredible, so that people can learn more about nutrition and food. So, okay, we're going to end it, and have a good evening. Thank you.